just talking.
How a prophet can see images through God, though God is infinite and beyond any image. Yeah, good question. I had that last week. It was lurking. Okay, go on, Lev. Okay, and Jason, you do the footnotes. That's how.
It's 13.
Okay, and Dan, you explain it to us.
Okay, I'm going to read faster. Student, but I'm very troubled by the verse that states you did not see any image on the day God spoke to you on Mount Sinai. Devarim, note 32.
Verse there warns us to be extremely careful to remember that when God revealed himself to us on Mount Sinai, we saw absolutely no image of anything tangible because God is totally beyond any shape or form. He is infinite and ungraspable. The rabbi has told us that the prophets see many tangible images when God reveals himself to them. How can this be?
This indicates the opposite of everything you have been saying. Rabbi, do you think this difficulty is created merely by what I have been saying? You'll find the same contradiction between different verses. One verse says, you did not see any image, and another verse says, he, that is Moshe, sees the image of God, Bamidbar 12:8. Yet, another verse says, upon the image of him, there was an image with the appearance of a man from above, Yecheskel 1:26. And there are many other examples like this. Student, give me an answer to both problems. Note 33.
First problem is that mentioned in the previous note. The second problem is that even without the words of the rabbi, the same contradiction exists within the verses themselves. One verse says, you did not see any image, and another says, he sees the image of God.
The verse states, what form can you compare to me that I would be like it, says the Holy One, Yeshayu 40:25. Similarly, it states, what form can you compare to God? And what image can you associate with him? The essential point is that God certainly does not cause the prophet to make a mistake. On the contrary, he makes him wise and shows him the truth. Surely there would be no greater stumbling block than for God to show the prophet images in a situation where it is vital to distance oneself completely from any semblance of an image. However, the reality is that the prophet understands the truth with absolute clarity. We have already learned that the way the prophet grasps and understands things is not the same as the way we ordinarily grasp and understand things. The knowledge he gains is transmitted directly into his consciousness and engraved there with absolute certainty. Everything he needs to know is totally clear without any doubt. This is a type of knowledge that man in his natural state of mind can have no conception of whatsoever. Using this higher level of knowledge, the prophet's soul will understand perfectly every element of the prophecy. It will be clear to his soul that God is the one appearing to him and communicating to him whatever is being communicated. It will also be clear that it is impossible for him to see God, not only through vision of the physical eye, but even through the spiritual vision, which consists only of perception and understanding. Note 34.
We will soon learn that the prophet does not see things through normal physical vision, but in a higher spiritual way.
Since one cannot have any conception of God's essence, it will also be clear that the divine glory appearing to him is causing created prophetic images to appear in his mind. He will understand that these images are the means through which he is able to receive the knowledge he needs to acquire. This is the meaning of the verse we mentioned above. I appear in the consciousness of the prophets in created images. Ori or Rabbi, do you either of you know what word in Hebrew corresponds in this word, in this text, to the word essence? God's essence.
Actually interesting, because when he read it, he didn't use the word of essence. He just said lahasig inyano yisbarach, the matter of his matter. So inyano, but that's etzem is the word for essence, I don't think he used it, did he, Uri?
I think you're right. Inyan, matter
Yeah.
or issue.
Yeah, like description or something.
It's very interesting. The word inyan. The word inyan, even though in common Hebrew it's issue or matter, le'ayin is to sift through, to gain an understanding. And I think it comes from the word ein, which means eye. So inyan has to do with seeing and understanding. They're all tied together. It's an interesting word. I never really thought about it that way before.
You're right. I guess what it's matter. Like, what do you see? What if you want to define it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you perceive?
Is that
so
what
perhaps he really did mean essence?
Yeah, maybe.
By using the word inyan.
Yeah, I think it's not a bad translation.
Yeah.
Is that what they say when they say the word in Yiddish, inyan?
Yeah. Like the Indian of Krishma, like the matter, the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This week's Parsha, it starts off, and Hashem spoke to Moshe Bahar Sinai about Shemitah. So the very famous Rashi that says, "My Inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai." Why of all the mitzvot does Shemitah have to be told? Do we have to be told was said at Har Sinai, at Sinai? So there, the word Inyan really means what's the idea? What's the idea of putting these two things together? What's the connection?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It's a deep word. Okay.
We see, therefore, that the truth is absolutely clear to the prophet, removing any possibility of misunderstanding. True knowledge is engraved in his mind, establishing the absolute truth of all these matters. The prophet will not experience a prophetic vision unless he understands at the same time that he is not seeing God's essence, but a created prophetic image. Therefore, although it says, I appear in the consciousness of the prophets in created images, we are always warned, what image can you associate with him? Yeshayu. This is because the prophet does not see an image unless he also sees that it is only a prophetic image created in order that he should understand what he needs to understand. He knows that he cannot grasp God's simple essence, which is totally beyond any kind of image. Similarly, Moshe warned that
Just by the way, here he does use the word atzmuto, the etzem. It's the same word for bone, by the way. Our bones are atzamot.
It's worth noting that even the language is physical, even when we use it symbolically, right? Like it comes from etzem, it comes from bone, right? This ayin comes from eye, from vision. They talk about grasping, right? Like for conceptually ideas. So even in our linguistics, we use imagery that's very physical to describe things that are not physical. It's the matter, the means by which we communicate.
Interesting.
Great discussion.
Yeah, although I would think emotions are kind of quite have their own language. Maybe those are quite physical. We feel them. Happy, sad. These are not.
Right. The ones we use for thoughts, though, tend to have this physicality, like to understand, right? Literally to stand under, to perceive, right? We talk about perceiving an idea. That's the language of vision. Something is clear or obscured, right? We use this.
Yeah.
Actually, the word for sad is etzev, which is also the word for nerve.
Interesting. I think that could be a modern Hebrew thing, by the way. Etzev is is classical Hebrew. I think it's a bim. I don't know how they got it. You're nervous. Okay.
Sorry, please.
Okay.
Although it's like there's a number 35 there.
Above. Although the verse is rather brief, if this is what it means to say, note 35.
Briefness of the words, you did not see any image, suggests that they did not see any images at all. To this, the Ramchal replies that there are other verses that are equally brief, but mean the same thing as this verse. The Jewish people knew that they saw prophetic images of Mount Sinai, so that when Moshe said to them, you did not see any image, the meaning of his words were clear. They saw no image of God himself, but only created allegorical images.
It is no more brief than the other verses we mentioned. What form can you compare to me that I would be like it? And what image can you associate with him? Moshe was speaking with the Jewish people who had experienced the truth of all these matters. He was simply reminding them of what they had, in fact, already seen. You have explained the verse, you did not see any image, but you have still not explained the verse that says he sees the image of God. Rabbi, even that image that appears in the mind of the prophet can rightfully be called the image of God. The prophet has absolutely no doubt that what is being revealed to him, disguised in a particular image, is none other than God himself. He can therefore genuinely make such statements as, it was a vision of the image of God's glory. Yecheskel 128. That is the parsha that we're going to read for the Haftorah on Shavuos. That is very image rich. The Yecheskel, it's like all about vision. It's pretty intense. Anyway, I'm sorry. I've been trying to learn that Haftorah, but it's very tricky. And I saw God, Yeshayu, with his prophetically received understanding. He grasps with absolute clarity that the image he is seeing is caused by revelation of God's glory. He also knows that this image is merely the means through which he can arrive at an understanding of this revelation of God. This can be compared to someone who sees his friend in the mirror. Although it is not the friend himself inside the mirror, what he sees by looking at the mirror is certainly his friend and no one else. Consequently, if the mirror is distorted, his friend's appearance will also seem distorted in line with the distortion of the mirror. Note 36.
We'll learn in section 188 that Moshe saw these prophetic images as reflected in a clear mirror, while the other prophets saw them as if reflected in an unclear or distorted mirror. This affected both the clarity of the visions and the depth of understanding gained by the prophet.
However, he will have no doubt that the image he is seeing is that of his friend. He knows that if he looks at the distorted mirror when his friend is standing in front of it, this is the image that will present itself to him. The same thing applies to the matter we are discussing.
I'm sure if he had Zoom, he would have used Zoom rather than a mirror. It's unbelievable, right? We are interacting, we look at each other, and we really are speaking to each other, and we really are looking at each other, but we're not. We know that this is just an image. In fact,
and maybe when we're really in real life and we're really right in front of each other, that it's really also then just an image, and we're just a bunch of brains in jars somewhere. We don't know.
I thought you were just reading, Lev.
What's that?
I thought you were just reading.
Oh.
Yeah, well,
brains in jars.
That's like it could be. We don't know. Like, we don't know. I mean,
the Matrix.
The jar is the universe.
I'm just trying to deal right now with the fact that you guys aren't actually in my screen. I thought that was what was happening, and now I'm. All right.
This
is awkward.
The rabbis back screen is a distortion, as you can see. His
yes.
background.
That's his,
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
his distorted mirror.
I want the mess behind me to be distorted. By the way, Uri, aspaklaria as a mirror is interesting, right? I always thought it was like a reading glass.
So it's an old word that no one in modern Hebrew uses. But I came across it, I think, when I read Derech Hashem, because he used that word there as well. And I think it's some kind of like seeing glass.
Yeah, it's interesting that he translates it here as a mirror.
I don't think it's a mirror. I think it's a seeing glass. Yes.
Ground
Okay,
glass.
Lev.
Seeing glass. Okay. What are we at? 37?
No, I think you're reading from 36. However,
he will have no doubt that the image he is seeing is that of his friend. He knows that if he looks at the distorted mirror when his friend is standing in front of it, this is the image that will present itself to him. The same thing applies to the matter we are discussing. The prophet knows that God is appearing to him through this image, even though the image is merely what presents itself to him through his prophetic consciousness or through whatever else causes him to see in this image.
you know, if this information became public, all those dating apps would collapse.
God created a force that transfers a representation of his infinite attributes to the forms of every created thing in the world. This force is what brings about the appearance of these prophetic images in the prophet's consciousness. It's the next part of this chapter.
For this reason, this image can rightfully be called the image of God, and it can be said about the prophet that he sees the image of God. Note 38.
Even though the image of one's friend in the mirror is in no way the friend himself, but only representation of him in the shiny surface of the mirror, no can be still described as the image of his friend. So too, though the prophetic image is in no way God himself, but only a representation in the mirror of the prophet's consciousness, it can still be described as the image of God. It should be noted that the comparison is only limited because the image of his friend is the representation of the graspable and tangible form of his friend, and therefore reflects his friend in its general shape. However, God is infinite without any form whatsoever, and therefore the formed image that the prophet sees, while caused by the revelation of God's glory, cannot be said to represent it in the same way at all.
Mm-hmm.
Your explanation of this matter creates a new difficulty. According to what you have said, there is no difference between the prophecy of Moshe and the prophecy of the other prophets. All of them see these images, and all of them know that they are not images of God's true essence. Note 39.
In Bamidbar 12:7-8, when describing how Moshe's prophecy differs from that of all the other prophets, it states, I speak to him in a vision that is without riddles, and he sees the image of God. Therefore, until now, we would have said that only Moshe understood clearly what was being communicated to him without riddles. And furthermore, that only he saw the image of God. But now we have learned that all the prophets understand clearly the nature of what is being communicated to them, and all of them, including Moshe, saw the same type of representational images. This is problematic since it is one of the 13 principles of faith that Moshe's prophecy was fundamentally different from that of all the other prophets.
Good question.
Rabbi, now I will explain to you the fundamental difference between Moshe and the other prophets. The other prophets were not able to see even these images properly. They would only see them as if they were behind, partially obstructing walls or reflected in various mirrors or in an unclear mirror. Our sages explained this concept in their commentary on the verse itself. He sees the image of God. What is the difference between Moshe and the other prophets? Rabbi Yehuda says all the prophets saw through 9 mirrors and Moshe saw through 1. The rabbi said all the prophets saw through a dirty mirror and Moshe saw through a clear mirror. Since they are unable to see clearly even the images that appear to them, they cannot grasp all the details of what they are seeing. Consequently, they also fail to understand the full interpretation of these images. This is obvious since the only reason God is showing them these prophetic images is in order to teach them the knowledge contained within them. When they see these images, or the images in great detail, they understand the knowledge contained within them in great detail. If they have only a limited perception of the images themselves, they will certainly not be able to fully grasp the detailed knowledge contained within them. They will just grasp the small amount of knowledge that corresponds to the small amount of the image that they were able to see. However, Moshe was at least able to see the prophetic images totally clearly, and therefore he attained a knowledge that was as complete as any created being can attain. He achieved the highest possible level of prophetic understanding. However, it is obvious that even Moshe only saw what he was given permission to see.
Now we understand the true meaning of the verse quoted in the previous note. Only Moshe properly saw the image of God, the created prophetic images. The other prophets saw them only in an unclear form. Consequently, the knowledge that Moshe attained through them was clear and without riddles, unlike that of the other prophets.
There is another aspect of prophetic vision that I would like to bring to your attention. Note 41.
Having learned that there are different levels of clarity in the vision of the prophetic images, we must now understand that the nature of this vision is totally different from our normal physical vision.
Although we know that the prophets see these prophetic images, this does not mean that they see them in the same way that the physical eyes see. The way they see them is through spiritual vision. The same object can be perceived by the physical eye and by the soul, which is beyond anything physical. Both of them will establish that it is in fact that object. However, each one sees it in its own way according to its own nature. The soul can see what is inside a barrel and inside a wall.
X-ray vision?
The sages described how during the 40 years when the Jewish people were in the desert, they did not need to see by the light of the sun or the moon. It was permanently light due to a higher spiritual form of light, and they were therefore able to see inside containers such as barrels. Furthermore, after the final redemption, the light of the moon and the sun will be replaced permanently by this higher form of divine light. Elkut Shimoni Pekudei 427.
Wow, this is so intense. The soul can, oh wow. That was 41 or
42.
42. Okay, yeah. Whereas the physical eye cannot. Let me just read that sentence again. It says the soul can see what is inside a barrel and inside a wall, whereas the physical eye cannot. This is because the eye functions in a different way, limited within the parameters that God has established for it. Nevertheless, the physical eye will see the barrel in its own way and confirm that it is a barrel, and the soul will see it in its own way and also confirm that it is a barrel. Similarly, with regard to prophetic vision, it is obvious that the prophets do not need to see the form that is called lion or the form that is called eagle. Note 43.
See, for example, Yechezkel 1:10, when the prophet describes how he saw a vision of certain spiritual beings with four faces, the face of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle.
Again, by the way, I'm just going to finish this sentence, but that part, that stuff that Yechezkel talked, I mean, in the Haftarah, it's like, it's really far out stuff. It's really hard to understand. But I was just reading it last night. I had no idea it was going to be in here today. Similar, let me just read that again, just because it gets disconnected. It says, similarly, with regard to prophetic vision, it is obvious that the prophets do not need to see the form that is called lion or the form that is called eagle or any other form in the way the physical eyes see them. They see them in the way the soul sees. Oh man, I'm telling you.
Okay, good.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, how does the soul see inside a barrel or in a wall? I'm a little, that's, I get it a little bit. that it's different than physical vision, but that part is it feels linguistic. I don't know what the intention of that is.
His intention is to show us that it's a completely different way of seeing. Well, how it works, I can't tell you, Dan.
All right.
Not until you're
Let
40.
me ask you this. You ever look into somebody's eyes and you can tell what's going on? You can tell where they're coming from or that something else is going on just by looking at their eyes. You can look at things sometimes that are like.
Yeah, but you could explain that physically.
Well, there's a fourth dimensional thing. So you could see in the barrel, like you see a box, like a square. Dimensional being can look in the barrel, but that's probably not what's intended.
Yeah.
I'll let you think about that. Or read Flatland sometime. It's pretty much the same idea. Anyway.
Okay, chapter 4. Let's see. We can. We got 4 and 5. Are we not going to finish?
Yeah, I don't know. We might not finish tonight because that's a lot, but maybe we will. 53. That's like 15 pages. We might, but if we have 45 minutes, I know we have a half an hour. I'll just start reading. Part 4, the advantage of seeing these images and how to interpret them. I still need to know why the prophet needs to see these images at all. Note 44.
We learned in the previous section that the prophetic images have no intrinsic existence. Their purpose is only for their interpretation, through which the prophet understands whatever God wishes to communicate to him.
What would have been lacking if God had conveyed to the prophets whatever knowledge or predictions he wanted to convey without showing them any images at all?
Great question. He's asking good questions tonight.
It's funny, the student and the rebel. It's the same guy.
Wait, what? Again? Oh.
Done. We are in rare
You've
form
been looking
evening.
through that hazy mirror, Don, this whole time. You thought there were 2 people.
They've written this. Never mind. Please go on.
I can give you an easy and simple answer. God wants his glory to be revealed to man according to the ways of man. 45.
We will learn at the end of this paragraph that the divine glory is too elevated to be grasped directly. Therefore, God reveals his glory to his prophets according to the ways of man. He shows them images similar to the physical forms of this world, since the physical forms reflect the emanations of divine glory that bring them into being. These prophetic images are best means through which to communicate to prophets some knowledge of the divine glory itself.
As we explained above,
I could explain to you the beauty of the crown jewels, but I would never do justice, right, to what a picture could do.
Is that what you mean to relate from what he had just said?
Yes, sir.
In the ways of man?
Yeah, meaning no, it's the ways of man, but it's also what God wants to communicate is his glory. That's why I thought about that.
Okay, as we explained above, the end of chapter 7, part 3, the creations in their very forms reflect the emanations and attributes of his glory and are actual representations of them.
Not only do the creations, according to their limited detail, reproduce the general pattern of the divine emanations, but every detail of each form is a concrete representation of the particular force that gives rise to it.
Therefore, God shows the prophets his glory according to the forms that are created by it, since these forms below are merely representations of the corresponding emanations and attributes above. This phenomenon of reproducing the divine emanations and attributes in the various forms of the lower worlds is itself one of God's attributes.
Is this kind of like fractals? Or each bit is also like an image of itself in a sort of lower.
Holograms. All right, let me finish that sentence again. It controls the process through which these forms are able to represent and hint at the emanations themselves. God created an entire system which ensures that every single aspect of the spiritual forces that he chooses to reveal in the world should be represented in the form of created things. Note 47. Spiritual term. Spiritual forces.
The term spiritual forces refers to the divine emanations and attributes just mentioned.
As a result, every element of the forms of created things has an appropriate underlying reason that explains exactly why it has that particular form. Nothing is by chance. Everything is precisely the way it is because of the fundamental principle we mentioned, that the supernal spiritual forces should be reflected in the forms of the actual creations of the lower worlds. Because the divine glory is so exalted, the prophet can only see these spiritual forces through their relationship with the actual created things in which they are reflected, as we have explained in note 48.
Here concludes the easy and simple answer that the rabbi wished to give to the student's question. The prophetic experience consists of the revelation of the divine emanations of God's glory that bring everything into existence. In this way, the prophet can understand the way God runs the world and what will happen in the future. However, these emanations are too elevated to be grasped directly. Instead, God shows the prophet created images of whatever forms these emanations give rise to in the physical world. This way, he is at least able to understand the emanations through their association with the created world.
However, there is more depth to this whole subject. Note 49.
We will now learn that there is actually a substantial benefit to perceiving the divine attributes through these images, which would have been lacking if the prophet had received knowledge of the attributes without seeing any visions.
The system and the method God uses to reproduce the divine emanations in the various forms of the lower world, as we explained, play an extremely active role in defining all the various forms of created things. I will give you an example of this. Since God wanted to reproduce the element of his divine surveillance of the world in the form of an eye, a human being has eyes. Moreover, because he wanted to reproduce the three attributes of his surveillance, loving, kindness, judgment, and compassion, in the colors white, red, and green, there are these three colors in the human eye. It is obvious that God had wanted to reproduce these elements of his surveillance in a different way. Man would not have had these visual organs with their various parts. He would have had different organs with different parts. The same thing applies to every other characteristic of created beings and their different qualities. In some beings, certain characteristics and qualities are predominant, and in others, different characteristics and qualities are predominant. Predominant, thus giving rise to all different physical forms we find among them. Note 50.
Different qualities and characteristics a creature needs to have will affect its physical form. If it needs to be swift and an intelligent hunter, it will have one form. If it needs to be passive and simple, it'll have another form. This whole process is determined by the way God chose to replicate the divine emanations that give rise to these qualities within the created forms of the world, as explained above in the example of the human eye.
In this way, he is able to understand not only the attributes that God emanates, but also the way they are reproduced in the forms of the created world. As a result, he is able to gain a precise understanding of how these divine emanations interact with the creation, grasping all the different levels and details of this process that God put in place. 52. Wow, you have a lot.
Not only is the prophet able to understand the divine emanations through the proper interpretation of the prophetic images, but he is also able to understand the way these emanations actually interconnect with the creation, shaping every detail of the physical world. In this way, he understands the precise form of everything within the physical world and its spiritual source. The Ramchal writes in another work, Not only will the prophet understand that the prophetic image of the lion represents God's attribute of expansive power, but he will also understand why the lion is in the form it is in this world. He will understand how this attribute of expansive power needs to be drawn down to the world in this form by the divine presence, and that this is what gives rise to the form of the physical lion. Klach, B'schei, Chochmah, 11b.
Consequently, the prophets see images of lights that are big or small, ascending or descending, moving or stationary. Note 53.
The divine emanations are infinite and ungraspable. However, God enables a prophet to see them in a created prophetic vision as different forms of light. A particular emanation may act upon the world at different times in more or less powerful way. Therefore, it will be seen as a greater or smaller light. If its effect on the world is becoming more distant or more immediate, the light may be seen as ascending or descending, and so on.
They also see different kinds of forms to the forms of the creatures of the lower worlds, as we find in the books of the prophets. They see all this through their spiritual vision, as we explained above, end of part 3 of this chapter. By contemplating these images, they are able to understand the hidden ways of divine emanations and the entire system of the Hanhaga. What the images actually tell the prophets about the divine attributes is based on the implication of the form of each image. Note 54, but hang on one second. Do we want to, I don't know, we're going to keep going because we're not finishing it, right? We're going to keep going when Ori leaves?
Please keep going. I'll listen to us tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do we want to finish? We could.
Finish.
We could wait till
we
next
could do
week.
next time and not rush it.
Yeah, we could do next time, and
How
we'll
far
also
was
have
it?
some time to maybe just discuss our impressions of this book and maybe what we're going to do next.
How far do we want to get to actually finish? 6:45?
Oh, that's the end of the book. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it would be worthwhile to read his summary of the book.
Yeah.
We'll see if we agree with it.
Everybody good night. I'm going to sign off.
Okay. Good night,
Talk.
Ori.
No matter what. Thank you, Rabbi.
Feel
Hey,
better.
Uri.
Okay. Oh, note 54. Great.
The fact that the interpretation of the prophetic images must correspond to the image on our physical world is the logical consequence of what we learned above. The prophet cannot see the actual divine emanation that is being revealed to him because it is too elevated. Instead, he sees the prophetic image of the form this emanation brings into the physical world. He understands the interpretation of this image in terms of the emanation itself and grasps how the emanation gives rise to that particular form in the world and is reflected within it. It follows that the interpretation of the prophetic image must correspond to the nature of the form in our world. We will now see two general examples of this correspondence.
Oh, good.
For example, the round encompassing form of a sphere has no right side or left side and no top or bottom. It therefore indicates a general divine supervision that equally encompasses everything it supervises. However, a straight figure can be divided into 3 sides, right, left, and center. It has a top and a bottom. It therefore indicates a hierarchical and individualized system of supervision. 55.
Top, middle, and bottom represent hierarchy. There are higher and lower levels of divine guidance and protection according to the level of those involved. The division into left, right, and center represents the 3 main types of divine supervision: loving kindness, right side, strict judgment, left side, and a combination of the 2, i.e. compassion, center. Depending on each individual situation and person, different combinations of these types of supervisions will be used. See Klalim, Misefer, Kinas, Hashem, Tzivakos, and 15.
Okay, I'm just going to reread the sentence. It gets confusing. It therefore indicates a hierarchical and individualized system of supervision going from a higher level to a lower level in its supervision of everything under its charge. It also has an individual approach, sometimes acting with loving kindness and sometimes with strict judgment. This principle applies to all the prophetic images. Note 56.
For example, that the interpretation of a prophetic image depends on the meaning implied by its form.
I will explain these concepts more fully. The divine will ensures that the entire physical world is continuously sustained on a basic level by a general divine supervision. With regard to this basic level of subsistence, there is no differentiation between one species and another or between one person and another. The greatest celestial sphere and the tiniest flea are equally in need of subsistence. As a result, the divine supervision encompasses all creatures equally, and all of them are sustained and supported unconditionally by his great power. Note 57.
Every element of creation is necessary in order that there should be an arena for man to serve God and perfect the world. On this level, all creatures are given existence, not because of the merits they have, but because they are necessary for the ultimate purpose of creation. On this level, God does not differentiate between one person and another, or even between a tiny flea and a great prophet. All things receive their basic existence for the higher needs of creation, regardless of what they do. The sphere, which has no top or bottom and no left or right side, meaning that there is no hierarchy and no individualized approach, represents this element of the Hanhaga, based on a note by Harav Chaim Friedlander.
There's something in the daily morning prayers, I think, that says something like, or maybe it's only on Shabbat, I don't know. It says, man has no preeminence over beast. And I didn't understand that. What does that mean, preeminence? But I guess that's what this means, is that we're all like equally at the mercy of.
Right.
Do you know what I'm talking about? That where it says that man has no preeminence. I was like, what?
Yeah, it's a mincha of Shabbat.
Oh, mincha. Interesting. Okay. Let's see, we said 57. However, the divine system of judgment that oversees man's task of serving God consists of many different subdivisions. God weighs everything on the scales of justice, deciding whether to reward or to punish. Each thing is considered individually and judged for what it is. Here are some more specific examples of prophetic visions. Note 58.
Having described the two basic forms of prophetic images, a sphere and a straight figure, and what they represent in terms of the Hanhaga, the Ramchal provides a number of more specific examples of these types of prophetic images and their meanings.
When God wants to show the prophets his great power, which sustains unconditionally all of existence, and his divine supervision, which encompasses each thing equally without exception and misses nothing, he shows them, as it were, the light of his radiance encircling the whole of creation like the firmament that surrounds the world on all sides.
This is a more specific example of the spherical form representing how God sustains all of existence unconditionally.
We find this image in this verse. There was the image of a firmament over the heads of the angels, Yechezkel 1:22. When telling you that's when he wants to show them his judgment, he will appear to them like a king sitting on his throne, with benevolence in his right hand and justice in his left, judging all his creations with his benevolent justice. Note 60.
This is a more specific example of the straight figure representing how God judges and guides the world according to our deeds.
3. Sometimes he wishes to show them a detailed view of the forces that sustain the world unconditionally, with each force being supported by the previous one. 61.
The third image belongs to the same category as the first one, except that the first image relates in a general sense to God's overall sustaining of the entire existence, while this form relates to the specific levels of this process and how each new level is sustained and supported unconditionally by the more elevated level that precedes it.
61.
Likewise, our sages.
Likewise, our sages described upon what does the earth stand? Upon the pillars, and upon the pillars that stand upon the waters. The waters upon the mountains upon the wind upon the storm, and all of them are suspended upon the arm of God. Chagiga 12b. When he wishes to show them this concept, you will see many spheres inside one another, and each one sustaining the one below it, with the world in the center of all of them, and God supervising and sustaining them all. 62.
The reason each lower sphere is represented as being inside and encircled by the previous one, like the layers of an onion, is that this symbolizes the fact that each lower force is surrounded and sustained unconditionally by the previous more elevated one. In this image, the physical world itself is represented as inside all the other levels in this very center, since it is sustained by all the previous levels. 13b.
Sometimes he wants to show them the entire process through which each force is drawn out and develops from the one above it, with this lowly world at the end of them all, as we explained earlier, beginning of chapter 6, part 2, note 63.
In the previous example, the concept was how each force is supported and sustained by the previous one. In this example, the concept is how each lower force develops from the previous one, descending level after level to the point that this lowly physical world can come into being. Therefore, the prophetic image represents the forces as one below the other, this world beneath all of them.
Then he will show them many different levels, each one below the previous one, with this world beneath all of them. Sometimes he wishes to show them the hierarchical level of created beings as defined by their closeness, or as their by their closeness to or distance from God, or the hierarchical level of his divine attributes as defined by their closeness to his perfection or their distance from it through their stronger association with the lower world. Then he will show them many different levels within one another, like a room within a room within a room, or a garment over a garment over a garment, with this lowly world outside all of them, the most exterior of all of them. Note 64.
When we wish to represent a king, his closest confidants, his loyal servants, and the general populace, we will picture the king in the inner chambers surrounded by his close confidants, with his servants in the outer chambers and the general populace in the courtyard or outside the palace. This highest level is the inside and the lowest on the outside, as in the Beit HaMikdash. This is the precise opposite of image 3, where the highest level is on the outside and the lowest on the inside. The reason for this is that there, the concept is how the king supports and sustains each lower level, enveloping them in his unconditional protection, just as when a father wishes to carry a child and a baby, he may envelop both in his arms, with the child in turn enveloping the baby in his arms.
Moreover, if God wants to communicate to him all the different concepts mentioned above, as well as the practical ramifications all at the same time, he will show him all these different images simultaneously. It doesn't matter that these images actually contradict one another. 65.
For example, in image 3, the lowly physical world was in the center. In image 4, it was at the bottom. And in image 5, it was on the outside. However, there is no contradiction between them because each one represents a different conceptual framework. If God wants to show the prophet how these concepts operate simultaneously, he will show him these visually contradictory images at the same time. Such seeming contradictions are commonly found within the words of the Zohar and the Arizal in their descriptions of the higher words of prophetic vision.
This is similar to the concept of the contradictory divine statements uttered simultaneously that we mentioned above, part 2 of this chapter. You shall not cohabit with your brother's wife, and her brother-in-law shall cohabit with her. Remember the Shabbos and keep the Shabbos. The reason this, I don't remember him talking about this. I remember this idea, but I don't remember. Did we just read this?
No.
A few weeks ago.
Weeks
This
ago.
was
Right?
a few weeks ago.
The reason that it is possible is that whatever is above the realm of the natural world is not limited by the laws of the natural world.
I think, just if I may, I think the thing for that one was that sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. That there's not like a hard and fast rule. That there is, but it's just contextual. Is that what people recall on that, or?
Sounds good.
Okay, go on. Sorry.
The reason that it is possible is that whatever is above the realm of the natural world is not limited by the laws of the natural world. We already find this phenomenon to some extent in dreams, since dreams are related to prophecy, as our sages have told us. A dream is a 60th of prophecy. In dreams, we see things differently from when we are awake. The subject of the dream will suddenly change in a totally illogical way. One will see somebody in a dream and think it is Reuven. In the next minute, it will seem that the very same person has turned into a house or a stone. The general point is that one will see combinations of things that are totally different from what one normally sees when awake. This principle applies even more to prophecy, which is completely above the natural realm. God causes to appear in the consciousness of the prophet whatever images he chooses, as we already explained above, part 2 of this chapter, note 66.
Ramchal has explained to us at great length the nature of prophecy. We have learned that a prophet sees images resembling the forms of this world and simultaneously receives the true interpretation of these images. This interpretation gives him knowledge of the divine emanations that are being revealed to him. He is thus able to understand the profound and complex system of Hanhaga. The entire content of this book is based on this true interpretation of the prophetic visions. The Zohar and the works of the Arizal contain descriptions of the visions themselves, the appearance of lights rising and descending, spheres within one another or below one another, and so on, as the Ramchal is described in this section. Daat Tevunot consists of their true interpretations. See translator's introduction, pages 19 and 21. These are the Ramchal's words in his work, Me'amar HaVikuach. That which the prophets only describe briefly, our sages explain more fully. When God shows a prophet a vision or of the spiritual forces, he shows him all that is mentioned in the words of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in their commentaries. The descriptions in these works are not just metaphors, they are true. They are everything that was shown to the prophets when they saw visions of the divine glory. The benefit of knowing all these prophetic visions is that these visions give knowledge of the entire system of Hanhaga and its laws to the prophet who sees them, and to the sages who know, through the received tradition, what the prophets see. Sha'arei Ramchal, page 60. The prophets only described briefly the map of the higher worlds. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal give us a more complete description of these worlds through what they receive via tradition and direct revelation.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Your
Okay.
explanation of this subject has made everything very clear.
Yes, it has.
Brilliant.
All right, guys.
He's very self-congratulatory.
So yeah, let's finish here tonight, and then we can keep part 5 for next week, and do the summary of the book. Unless you guys are finished, had enough with this book and don't want to go on.
We got pretty close to the end.
I'm trying to think of some good parables for what I think he's talking about over here. One idea that the Maharal writes about is, that man is in the image of God. He explains also in the physical image, meaning man's physical image represents godliness. So he says, animals are bent over, go on all fours, and man stands upright. So that represents that man has dominion over animals. That's a spiritual concept, dominion. I don't think it's conceptual. Yet when you translate it into the physical, it gets this form. So they would see things like that. I imagine that's the. And then the other interesting part is that understand the mechanics of it, which is fascinating. Gentlemen,
before we go, just want to encourage you guys, and maybe the rabbi can clarify because I don't remember, but a while ago, a few years back, right now we're about to approach Lag BaOmer, and this whole time is like this special season of purification of our souls to get us ready for Shavuos. And so I've never done this before, but I've been counting the Omer every night. Can't believe it. And I haven't been listening to music, which is also beyond my imagination. The point I'm trying to make, because I could go on and on, but I will not, is that there's this really good Gemara. I think it's 33b in Shabbos. You can read it in English on Sefaria. It's about Shimon Bar Yochai, I think, which we were just talking about, in a cave, traveling through time. Is that right? Is it 33b? I think that's what it is. Lamed Gimel or Lamed Bet. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the story because I haven't read it in a few years, but it is something special. I think, 33. Because
makes sense.
About Lag BaOmer is like the 33 and the third. I don't know. It's some cosmic, really cool stuff. So maybe we'll find a link. Maybe the rabbi will send it out, or maybe I'll send it to him. I don't know. But tomorrow night, Lag BaOmer, it's a special time. And it's not if you listen to music, go to a bonfire and party. I mean, I'm going to be listening to music. I can't believe it. It's like a real special time. So this is a good little inspirational reading you could add into it. I'm going to try to read it.
Listening to music and burning things down.
Yeah, man. It's speaking of music and fire, there's all this cosmic spiritual stuff about fire. We talked about it once maybe in a different class. I don't think it was this one. When the commandments and God was giving the Aseret HaDibrot, it says that it was through smoke and a fire and a thundering sound on the mountain. And the fire is for the word smoke, he uses the word ashan, right? Remember we talked about that? Ayin, Shin, and Nun. Ayin for Olam, this world. Shin, Shemayim, and Nun for Neshama. So it's like the Neshamas were connected to this world and the Shemayim, and they could see and hear things simultaneously at the same time, like we just read about, like multiple messages coming at the same time, and the whole space-time continuum thing was not as we know it. Like it was non-linear for everybody. They were all prophets. All of the people that were on receiving the Torah at that time were all at a prophetic level, and they just fell over and died. I mean, it's an incredible thing. And so the stuff that we were just reading about all the stuff about prophecy is like stuff that we can still tap into because we're like imprinted by it. It's like really deep cosmic stuff, man. And I'm really digging this stuff. So can't wait. I'm going to Israel. I don't know if either you're I know he's not going, Dan, right? He's getting married. So, or Jason, but I'm going to Israel August 8th, 8/8.
I'm not marrying Don.
No, I know.
We're all clear.
already married. But,
If you can get away, I'm going. I mean, I don't know. Reb Nitzan, maybe he wants to go to Israel. But I have a room in Yerushalayim for like 3 nights, and then whatever you want to do the rest of the time, I'm going with my sister. But it's
Cool.
yeah, I've never been there, and I've never been this plugged in. Like I feel plugged in now, so I want
One
to
man
go.
lost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good time. Hopefully, we'll all the windows of opportunity will still be open.
Hope so.
Thank
My
you,
niece,
Dave.
my niece was supposed to go to Israel this week and couldn't travel because of COVID
Oh man.
with her class, her middle school class. So, what are you gonna do?
This is in Schachter?
She's at, yeah, that's right.